Um, this is Bellows Falls, Vermont, where I live. I've lived here about 7 years, and we're looking over at the back of the main street here. And right below me is the canal, which feeds the hydro, which creates electricity. And this is an old railroad town, Bellows Falls, old mill town, one of the oldest in America. And small mill town right along the Connecticut River. And this building that we're in, I bought about 7 years ago, and it's an old paper warehouse. So it's very simple, basic, big building that I've really greatly enjoyed working in, living in. It's very, I feel very privileged to have found it and been able to fix it up and work in it. It's been very conducive to my creative process. And the town is great. There's several artists around. It's a small, manageable town, and relatively close to everything. So it's worked out well for me. One piece that I have from that period, I have more pieces downstairs, but this is one of my favorites that I'm going to hang on to. I used to come up to, my mother lived in New Hampshire at the time, and I would go to her property and other places and get hemlock and spruce branches, and then I'd take them back to Brooklyn and I would mill them up into little boards and I made decisions.
You have that really peeking through.
Yeah. I was sort of inspired by kind of like battleships, old battleships. I like that it's just kind of a little incoherent, random. But as I'm putting it together, I'm making decisions to try to have some harmony to it, not really focusing too much on it, just kind of trying to find a balance. What I like particularly about this one is the way the lines are lining up. I think it adds a lot of interest to it. So that's the main thing I'm interested in at the moment. And squares, I've been working on a lot of squares. And symmetry, lately I'm into symmetry. So it's being a square, circles, and repeating patterns. And as I said, the lines running through, there's something very interesting feeling to me that I really want to work with. So I'm excited to see this one up on the wall.
So do you paint?
No, this is all found color. And I did started adding some color a couple of years ago. I started spray painting some, augmenting the found color, but it's like 99% found. This is all wood that I found at the dump, the landfill just north of here.
So literally you go to the dump?
Yeah. I did for over 10 years. The dump just closed. They're no longer taking this material, which was C&D, construction, demolition. They closed the dump in Vermont that I went to. So it's not available to me anymore. And the other dump that I used to go to in New Hampshire, they won't allow people to pick through it. They destroy it. So I've kind of reached the end of that source. But fortunately, I've got a lot of it, and so I have enough to work with for now. And I have been acquiring it through other means, through buying stuff, which I never did before. So it's available, in a different way. I'm sad that I can't go back and continue working with it, but honestly, I was getting a little tired of it anyway. It's really very dirty and very laborious work. So I have already done a lot of this work, so I'm happy to be using this material that I already spent probably years collecting. I mean, I know I spent years collecting it, but the actual processing of this, probably years, gluing it together, sanding it. So it feels good to be making use of this material. And something that I'm actually, it re-energizes me. It's like a new direction. I bought a few pieces at antique salvage places, and so I've even got more stuff, but not like I used to. I used to go there every week and fill up my van, and it was a huge project. About 4 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, where I was again working with that structure and just working with black paint, and I was really trying to make pieces that were just one color, in this case black. I made some that were blue, where I was trying to create just a very simple, minimal, repeating lines that were kind of hypnotic. All this wood I collected at the dump. And like I said, I hadn't been using much of this material as much recently, so this is fun to be working with this material again. And I keep coming back to the grid. I'm really loving grids lately, square formats and grids, and just playing around. Like, I didn't really know what this one was going to look like in terms of its overall final look, and I just came upon this in the process. So it was like an interesting and fun process of working with this material composition, circles. And I see a lot of potential to do more variations of this. You know, as I was doing it, I was really becoming overwhelmed with all the possibilities. So I thought this is a good start. I feel like it's a fairly successful beginning. And this piece over here is one that I did like a month or two ago, again with the grid, again with the reclaimed wood. And this is all wood that was unpainted, just weathered wood. But I did add color on top. So in the past couple of years, I have been, in some pieces, adding color. So in this case, it's acrylic gouache, and I like the bright, vibrant colors, the contrast with the old wood, and the way it moves around in the grid. A lot of energy, and this reminds me too of Mondrian's paint. Is it Mondrian? Yes, Broadway Boogie Woogie, that famous series. I think there's kind of a fun little reference to that. I don't ever really make work that references other artists, but I see the connection there. I was making it like, that makes sense. And like I said, I like grids lately, and I love seeing the wall through the work, the transparency of the thing being solid and not solid, like the same in this piece over here. And this one is from a series I did this winter. I did about 4 or 5 of these where I'm adding, it's all wood that I painted. And this just started from one like accidental thing that I got my fingers on a piece, the wet black paint, and I was like, oh, I like that. So I just went with it, and I made a whole series of these that I was really into. I love to see pieces come from like an initial like little accident in the studio. and develop into a direction. That's very exciting. So I allow myself to continue to evolve that way. Just something looks interesting, just follow it. This is a small study I made a few weeks ago, where I just had an idea. I made it really quick. I had an existing grid from an old piece that was kicking around the studio, and I was like, well, let me just experiment with it. And so I thought this is an interesting little sketch to go with the other circles, because they're going to have a show this summer, so I think this piece would do well on that. And this one was done a couple weeks ago. Again, playing with the circles, but sort of a chaotic, organic, geometric form that start out with just the square and then just like organically make these shapes inside, no pre-planning, just sort of respond to it. And again, looking through the transparency of the piece on the wall and the energy of the silhouette is really exciting to me. And this piece here was like from a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. This is reclaimed wood from the dump, old decking, I think, that I put a top color on. And in this one, I think I just put down these really crude and fast masking tape lines. And I was just into that, just like directness of it, the sort of the crudeness of the, maybe crude isn't the right word, but maybe just the simplicity of just the tape lines and the way they feel in the end is they're obviously tape silhouettes, but they also begin to look like something else, like something confetti or leaves or birds or fish. It's very open to interpretation. And this is where I experimented with a different type of woodworking technique, where I cut vertical lines on the table saw on one side and then horizontal lines on the other. Created some transparency in the piece, which was a little technique, I don't know. I stumbled across it, I don't know if it's my own. And this piece is from a series I worked on last year, where I found a spool of wire in a free pile, a thick spool of rusted wire, which I really liked, and it led to using it in a few pieces. And this, I mean, I'm really into squares and structures of architecture and buildings. Like this just reminds me of the structure of a wall, an old building, an exposed wall. And I've always liked the crude way that holes are drilled through and like electrical wires are passed through. I just like that direct crudeness. And I sort of took that idea and just went with it. And I left this open because I just love the again, looking through and the way it feels like it's almost like a drawing or something, you know. And I loop the wires around on the end, just to, I don't know, I just like the drawing quality of them. They just feel very animated. This was a fun one to make. And this piece up here is a few years ago, and it's around the same time as that one, where I was experimenting with making lines as a background, to create like an illusion of depth. And this, I was using a lot of this particular wood at the time, which I got at the base, which is a torrefied poplar, which I could get at the time. I no longer can get it. But I like this, you know, all these colors are found from the dump, all the color. And so they're just kind of found and random, but I kind of like form them into sort of a spectrum of sorts. So it's kind of pleasing, where they don't quite work. They're kind of a little rough, but still have a feeling of something like a spectrum rainbow or something. And this is a piece that I made last year. I made a couple of these. I found a big bucket of nails at a old building supply, and I've always worked with nails, but I was intrigued by the idea of creating something almost like a ship in a bottle, where I basically had to build this from one direction. It can only be made one way to actually get the nails in. And I like the way that the nails penetrate the different layers and the transparency. These small pieces are an example of that technique I was telling you about, where I actually create this whole composition free form without a backing on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't build it on the backing, you know. So I create the composition that I like, and then when I'm satisfied with it, I make a backing to fit it.
Okay.
And so I run this part through a sander as a group, and it gets it, you know, a little more uniform. And I clamp it and glue it to a custom panel. It's a laborious process, but it makes it nice, consistent. Yeah, this is kind of a challenge, you know, to actually get these things to cooperate. Sometimes they're, you know,
It's so seamless. It's incredible.
yeah. I mean, it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but yeah. And I made a lot of these little ones. They were fun to make. I made a bunch of these. The problem is I made some that were even this big. Like this big. They're cute. I remember it was a couple years ago, I showed up at Provincetown and I brought down a bunch of work, and I had this one box that was this big. It had 20 of those in it. Just opened it up and it was adorable. It was like, someone should just buy the whole box.
Little Jenga.